It won't let us. It won't let us go live. Wait. No,
there we go.
again.
Oh, we're back.
We're back. Well, welcome back. If you are paying attention, I have no idea what happened. So we're gonna fix that.
Except that Jarvis is backstage.
Hold on. I have no idea what in the world.
All we can see on the screen.
It's coming. It's coming.
Feed is the countdown.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Let's all just reflect.
Are any of y'all watching Facebook?
I'm trying to.
Yeah, we've been watching it.
So what are you getting on Facebook independently? I'm just getting like a 2-second blackness.
Yeah, I've got Circle of Death.
Yeah, it's back on. We're good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's back on. We're good. That was
Yeah.
so weird. We literally got like smoke showed. We're smoked. I have no idea what happened. I've got a bunch of weird notifications over on the side on this though. I'm not going to worry about it. So we just need to. I'm
just getting like a 2-second.
Someone's got their speaker on. So it's turned into amateur hour here.
Hey,
On the
hey.
EMF.
I told you I'm not a good millennial. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's Rumley's fault that this whole thing went down.
Probably is.
Let's see if we get anybody back. It looks like there are 15 on there now.
Well, they're coming
Hopefully
back.
we'll,
They're coming back slowly but surely,
Yeah.
and that's all right.
So-
Well, I think they all got Fauci.
I
Which
think
he-
so.
I mean, honestly, it was a good time to end, I guess, because
Seems
he pretty much discussed the whole thing.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's hit some additional research. Maybe we'll get some folks back here. Let's take a look at the next.
Yeah,
that might be.
Give me a second here. And I'll
We
put
got
this on.
some
I'm seeing
vicious
that.
AV desynchrony here.
Oh, look.
You just need to not worry about that. Just do your thing. Like it's totally fine. It's totally fine. Everything's
Okay.
gonna be all right.
I'm just going to stop watching this because I can't find the comments anyway.
Yeah,
So,
no, nothing to worry about.
so that was an observational trial, multi-center observational trial. So, and by multi-center, multiple Henry Ford hospitals. So let's go down and to the right just a little bit and take a look at a trial that has very, very similar methods that was done in the Hackensack, New Jersey system. So a lot of hospitals in that system. And methodology there was pretty similar. I will say that the Henry Ford study was a little more protocolized with their approach to hydroxychloroquine. The physicians still made a decision based on God only knows what about when they would use it, when they didn't. But if they were going to use it, it was a little more protocolized. This study was also a retrospective observational trial. And their population, again, was admitted adults with positive PCR tests. They looked at patients who had hydroxychloroquine with or without azithromycin or no hydroxychloroquine. So really, they were looking for hydroxy versus no hydroxy. They did pull out some stuff that has I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo there. There we go. They did pull off some data so they can get a little bit of information on azithromycin alone. And just like the Henry Ford study, their primary outcome was in-hospital mortality. So their results, let's take a look. I believe that should be your next slide there, Mikey.
Mm-hmm. It's coming.
I think we may have skipped over one.
Nope, that was all I got.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me just run over it with you. So what they did was try to do the same thing the Henry Ford study did, which was propensity matching, which is another way of trying to control for baseline differences. Once they did that, they looked at mortality for hydroxychloroquine, getting it at all, and the hazard ratio was 0.99, which is pretty damn close to 1. Their confidence interval definitely widely spread on both sides of the interval, which means there was no difference. They added in zithromycin, no difference. Their hazard ratio there was 0.98. Clearly insignificant. They also measured their 30-day mortality, and 30-day mortality with hydroxy alone was 25. With azithromycin alone, it was 20. With either of them, it was 18, and with none, it was 20. All the same number. This slide is another Kaplan-Meier survival curve, and what you see is that all of those lines are crisscrossing all over the place, which is another way of saying that there is no difference. So what we have here is another observational trial with all of the same intrinsic limitations that the Henry Ford study did, that just happens to show an opposite result. They could have just as easily shown a benefit to hydroxy, and Henry Ford could have showed that there was no difference. That's one of the fundamental problems with these observational trials. And I would just like to read you 2 sentences from this paper. Whereas I really feel like the first paper oversold their results, this study, which didn't show any differences, I think did a great job of hitting on the limitations. And they, one couple of nice sentences here. Unlike randomized controlled trials, observational studies have inherent biases in patient allocation that cannot be fully adjusted for during statistical analysis. And then their limitation is observational studies cannot inferences given inherent known and unknown confounders, which is really the problem. We don't know about the confounding variables. We don't know why these docs picked to give hydroxy versus not to give hydroxy. And we can't get everything that goes into their mind and put it into a regression analysis. That data is just not available. And that is our second observational study.
Okay. Not much meat on the bone here.
Nope.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
All right. Do you want to go on to the next one?
I think maybe we should take a little bit of a hydroxy break.
Okay.
What do you think? Let's go to, I think most people can probably tell the way the literature is likely to bounce on this one, which is that maybe there's not a great benefit to hydroxy. But the good news here, and that's disappointing, by the way, I think all of us would really like it if this drug worked. And it's a bit disappointing that it doesn't. What are some agents with a little bit better evidence for them?
Are you looking at?
I'm assuming it's not the oleander.
Well, I don't know that there's a lot of oleander evidence yet.
All right. Well, that was a little setup there for Ritu. I was holding the ball for him so he could kick the field goal.
Yes. Boom.
Boom.
Pull the thing back.
No, I didn't do the peanuts thing.
So I don't have any slides, and I just realized on this platform I can't share my screen. So
actually, yeah, no, I can share my screen. Oh, are you sure? I think you can.
When I have a button here that says share screen, and it asks me if I want to download a thing. So I don't.
Oh yeah. Well, now you'll know for next time.
So that's okay. I can just talk through the study.
Weird.
I know. Kind of weird. What I do. What did you, since we're on Lighthouse, right?
Yeah.
A somewhat more freeform Lighthouse. Jeff? What did you want to hear about? Remdesivir or dexamethasone? I can't hear you.
No.
Let's hear remdesivir first.
I can't say it, but you can mouth it.
I don't know what you're talking about. So let's do remdesivir first, because I don't know much about that. And I would like to learn.
Well, so here's the deal with remdesivir, and I want to say this was a really well done study. It is the classic prospective, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. It is a little bit weird because it was part of an adaptive study. So they actually had a study going on where they were looking at like lots of different drugs, of which remdesivir was one of them. But they also had they had a hydroxychloroquine arm. They had some other antivirals in the mix, and remdesivir was one of what they did, and then they kind of focused down. So this is a multi-center trial. There were 60 trial sites, not all affiliated with Henry Ford Hospital, in multiple countries, and they began enrollment on February 21, and they ended it on April 19th. I will tell you that I think we also need to give a plug to, I got to pull up the website, but there is a website that is really good. It is the American Society of the American Society of Healthcare Pharmacists. If you go to that website and click on their COVID, they actually have a spreadsheet that they are continuously updating that has every study on therapeutics for COVID-19 on the spreadsheet. And you can read, like they just updated it with another remdesivir paper that was actually a negative study. And so I just would recommend that website, and we can put a link out at some point. I can send that to Mike.
Yeah, for sure.
But they also have it. You can find the study if you want to download the study. This study appeared in a small regional journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. That's a small regional New England journal. Anyway. Anyway, so this was, and they have a nice review on this website too. But anyway, so this was a randomized, controlled, prospectively collected placebo trial. They did the randomization by severity also, which is, I think, super cool. They did change their endpoint, their primary endpoint, before getting results back, but after the trial had started. And they are upfront about that in their methods. But they basically categorize each patient into one of 7 categories. And then one being not hospitalized, and like 7 being on ECMO or ventilator. So you obviously wanted to be a 1 and not a 7. And so they randomized to either remdesivir 200 milligrams the first day and 100 milligrams per day after that for 10 days. If you look at how it broke down, they did pretty well. They had 540 in the remdesivir group, 522 in the placebo. There was something like 99% of the folks got what they were supposed to get. The only kind of interesting thing that makes this data weird, and by the way, again, it was blinded. So everybody, if you were in the placebo group, you got this bag, but it looked just like the bag for remdesivir. So there was nobody knew what you were getting. It was just kind of going in over at the same time, et cetera. So that was really cool. What they did, though, is they got to a point pre-planned where their data safety monitoring board was going to review the data. The DSMB reviewed the data, and they said, this is compelling. We think you should stop, and we think you should report on this data now. So one of the things that's interesting about this paper is that it is actually considered a preliminary report. And it's, the FDA, this is the paper that the FDA based its approval of remdesivir on, and it was a preliminary report. So I found that interesting. that also means that a number of the patients weren't fully, weren't fully through the process. The process was following people out to 33 days, and not everybody was 33 days into it. So what did this show? Well, their primary endpoint was days to clinical improvement. And what they described is if you were in the classes 1, 2, or 3, which would be home, no oxygen, home on oxygen, or in the hospital, no oxygen and no care, which was the group of patients who the hospital held on to because they couldn't, they wanted to keep them separate for infectious and control purposes, but they weren't providing them any care. And so they were looking at the percentage of patients who got to one of those statuses. And what they found is that if you were in the remdesivir group, you got to that status on average in 11 days. And if you were in the placebo group, you got to that status in 15 days. So the positivity of this trial really is a shorter duration of illness. Now, if you look at the Kaplan-Meier curves, which Jeff is so fondly likes to show, the curves look first for mortality. There's pretty solid. If you look at it, there's separation along much of the way through between remdesivir and placebo, but then kind of like in the last 4 or 5 days, the shaded parts, which represent the 95% confidence intervals, start overlapping. So the number in terms of mortality is different, but they are not they're not statistically different. So remdesivir in this study was not shown to be statistically significantly improve in mortality, but did reduce the duration of illness.
Good Lord.
What?
So
I was just
the
like,
thing
man.
that was beneficial to this is that it was a time difference. So time to improvement. Now, there's another drug out there somewhere that's maybe a similar antiviral that we routinely poo-poo. So Tamiflu. Now, the
Oseltamivir.
Oseltamivir. Oseltamivir. So the big thing with that drug is that it shows at best a 24-hour and much more around 12 hours to improvement in symptoms. And these are in patients that are not admitted and not admitted to the ICU. So at least with remdesivir, 4 days, I mean, that's a reasonable period of time. And you're talking about hospitalized patients. So you can theoretically get them out of a unit, get them maybe home faster and free some resources up. So I'd say that's a little more meaningful outcome than with silly Tamiflu.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think, when this paper came out, I read it and I was like, whoa, there's no mortality benefit here. But think about your flu patient who gets admitted, your standard flu patient, because for whatever reason, this is respiratory viral illness, people want to compare it to the flu. And what we hear, it's just the flu. Well, we know it's not. But your standard flu patient who gets admitted, maybe even gets intubated, the reality is that duration of illness is 3, 4, 5 days. The Tamiflu was 7 days to 6 days, I think, in the original study in terms of overall symptoms. But when you look at how long some of these infectious patients are in the hospital, it's not weeks, months, years. The fact that you're going from 15 days to 11 days of illness, that's a significant reduction in resource utilization.
Yep.
And one of the things I think we're seeing with this disease process is that it's a longer road than most respiratory infectious illnesses. The people who get sick are sick for longer periods of time and are in the hospital for 25, 35 days, not just like 7 days or 6 days. I don't know, Dr. Crow, did you get a chance to look at this paper? If you had any methodologic thoughts on this?
I did not have any further thoughts. I think you covered it pretty well.
Well, thanks. Cool.
I think we should just fess up to what's going on here. Like, hold on a sec. Let's do a tactical timeout.
Okay.
These ladies are trying to figure out how to get their margaritas through the mask. All right, so let's let them get a sip, and we can jump back into it.
You got to move 6 feet apart.
That's 6 feet.
Well, I mean, if you're at a restaurant eating, right, you can take your mask down. So
Are they
being-
off camera because they just
Why I
snuggled
don't-
margarita?
They're
Maybe
being
margaritas.
they are being great.
Now the show can go on.
Yep, we're good.
You're welcome.
So you want to slide into a little bit of Dex, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that. So Dex is another randomized controlled trial. This was a study that at the time of the publication it enrolled about 12,000 patients, but they before we do that though, one of the things I want to go back on the remdesivir to really point out is they also in their protocol there was no freelancing allowed in terms of like you couldn't do other treatments too. So there weren't patients in the remdesivir trial getting hydroxychloroquine or steroids kind of willy-nilly. And I think the beauty of a prospective randomized controlled trial is you can control the care that they get. So in the dexamethasone trial, this is another prospective trial. It was not as finely controlled, I would say, as the remdesivir trial. It is also sort of multi-center. They had other arms that people could be randomized into, like hydroxychloroquine, like I think they were looking at ritonavir as in another arm. And they did a 2-to-1 randomization. So for every one person that got randomized to dexamethasone, they had 2 people in the placebo group. I'm just finding the paper on my, and so yes, this randomization was they had 2,000 patients that got Dex, 4,300 that got what they describe as usual care, and that's where I think there's a little bit of I'm not quite sure. They didn't fully define usual care, but they did define in their study like what percentage of people got hydroxychloroquine. It turned out to be the same in both groups. And remdesivir wasn't really a player when they collected this data. So they said, I think 3 people in the entire study got remdesivir. So that's like key is that there probably weren't, it wasn't as tight, but I don't think there were much like other therapies going on that would confound this. And their endpoint, though, was mortality instead of days to improvement. And they found that in all participants in the study, that there was an improvement in mortality with the use of dexamethasone. And so this was really the first randomized controlled trial that showed that there was an improvement in patient mortality with dexamethasone. Now, I think it's really important too. People, I think this virus, this pandemic has been an interesting example for the public to understand a couple of things. One, that tests have limitations. I mean, I have family members who are super smart but don't have any medical background and were astounded when I told them that a positive test and a negative test come with certain limitations. Yeah. And that there are other factors into sort of how likely something is to be a false positive or false negative. And I think the other thing that people are understanding is that when you have a treatment for something, it doesn't go from everybody's going to die and nobody's going to die, right? That never needed to treat is never one. And so that I think is that's kind of a difficult pill for some people to swallow, that when we say something improves survival, that means that we go from, let me look at, I got to go to table 2. But that means we're doing like, that's the figure. We're going from 28% who die to 24%.
Well, if you're one of those 4%, that feels good.
Yeah, and statistically, it's significant. Okay, so in the dexamethasone group, it was 22.9% death rate, and in the placebo, the usual care group, it was 25.7%. So it's basically all comers, a 3% improvement in survival. One other weird thing is this was not a blinded trial. This was an open label trial. So the usual care group didn't get like a saline bolus that people did. And so the patients knew what they were getting, because if they were paying attention, because they said, here's your dexamethasone. Now, the thing that's interesting is they had pre-screened, they had wanted to look at specific subgroups. And obviously, when you go subgroup hunting, you're going to find some bigger differences. But it's more scientifically valid if you decide what your subgroups are going to be in advance than it is if you kind of go fishing and go, oh, this looks good, let's report on this subgroup. And so the subgroups that they picked were going to be were predetermined. And the big one is, in their data, is that if you had been mechanical ventilation, if you were in the usual care group, they had a 41% mortality, whereas in the dexamethasone group, it was 29%. So a big drop of almost 12% in mortality in that group. And then in the group that got oxygen without being intubated, that group was 26% mortality versus 23%. And the group that required no oxygen on enrollment, the group that was hospitalized but not hypoxic, they actually had increased risk with dexamethasone and had increased mortality. And so it's not across the board that dexamethasone improved outcome. But in our sickest patients, it does appear that dexamethasone really significantly improved outcome. If you go back to our previously, again, Jeff pointed that out, that a big chunk of the survivors in the Wayne State crowd got dexamethasone, and now we see a study that shows that care may improve outcome. That's what I have on that paper. In my shop, we're not giving dexamethasone in the ED. We're leaving that up to the hospitalists and the pulmonologists. There's nothing in this data that says that timing matters in terms of hours. The group that was symptomatic for 7 days or longer when they were enrolled did significantly better with dexamethasone. So there is data that protracted illness does better with steroids, with glucocorticoids. But again, there's no data that says, minutes save lives with this therapy. So we're not at my place doing it. We talked about putting it in our EMS protocols, but we didn't. But I tell you what we did do. When this all started, we told our because there was some reports that dexamethasone may be bad. We in our COVID protocol, we said, if you're worried about COVID, don't use dexamethasone. Now we took that line out. So if it's a patient who's wheezing and has a history of COPD or asthma, we now give dexamethasone like we would.
So we're just giving it like we always used to, basically. Right. We didn't make any special provision for COVID patients. We're just saying
we told people
if there was somebody that would have got it before, then go ahead and do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think that Ritu, you just highlighted an important point with any of these studies is, it's not like this yes issue, yes or no, right? Like we have to figure out which patients it helps. And we're seeing some similar things go on with TXA and like, oh, well, maybe it helps people with a certain level of head trauma. But I think the same is happening here. There's just so much public attention on it. It's really hard because we're looking for that silver bullet and it's not there.
And I think that people think that if you have treatment for something, it just works.
Right. Like it either works or it doesn't, but that's not exactly how that goes.
Right.
Kind of like a test. It's either positive or negative. What's so hard about that?
You can be kind of pregnant.
Yeah, some tests are pretty positive, right? Or not.
He can be pregnant. So you can get,
But you can have false positive, false negative pregnancy tests too.
Yep.
There you go.
Absolutely. Well, how about we, so the main reason we wanted to hit on remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine or dexamethasone is one, there is definitely a signal there. And with Dex, I think it's probably a little more than a signal. And Dex is probably a pretty good candidate for a confounder in the Henry Ford study.
Yeah.
So I think that was really important information to help us get a better understanding of hydroxychloroquine. So there are some randomized controlled trials now about hydroxy. So why don't we hit on that? I believe Drs. Crow and Lincoln each have a hydroxy paper that they want to talk about. And then I will finish up with a Spanish, some Catalonians and their COVID.
Excelente. I guess I can go first. I have this lovely paper. I don't have any fancy slides. I have actual paper because unlike Remley, I am not a millennial.
I've got this.
Am I the only one who came prepared?
Apparently.
I've got some.
So this is a paper that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, hydroxychloroquine in non-hospitalized adults with early COVID-19. So this is your out-of-hospital patients, and this is very early in the disease. So this was looking at does hydroxychloroquine help with anything if you start it early?
So Dr. Lincoln, let's just to frame this. The debate has moved a little bit on hydroxychloroquine. First, it was for the sickest of patients in the hospital. And then it was, well, if you wait so long for them to get sick, then it won't show benefit. So you have to show it just in hospitalized patients. And then it was, well, if you wait until they're sick enough to be hospitalized, there's no way it can show benefit. So you need to see it in non-hospitalized patients. And then, well, even if they're symptomatic, that's too long. Now we need post-exposure prophylaxis. So what you're talking about is the population that has symptoms, but is not yet hospitalized.
Correct. That is accurate. And this comes up from the north. I looked at it. It's an international study. And then I saw Minnesota and was like, well, that's basically Canada anyway. But they did.
What are you talking about?
So this is a study that comes out of Minnesota
How
and Canada.
dumb it is to have a Texan try to do a Canadian accent. I'm just saying. Okay. Sorry, Dr. Lincoln. I will stop interrupting.
It's okay. The problem is I can't hear you, and I want to hear the joke, and I missed it. It's really disappointing.
No, you really didn't miss it.
No? Okay. That's good. Whenever I look at a study, I try to just sniff out where the bias is. That's like my go-to. Like I'm gonna prove this wrong. That's probably my personality, I guess, a little bit. But one of the first things that I looked at, it says right up front, primary funding source was private donors. And so that kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit because there was no explanation. But fortunately, you can look in the back of the study and it's like a normal set of private donors. They got a lot of grants and stuff. So there was no bias with that. But I certainly always like to look at who's funding the study and what the bias might be there. So this was a randomized controlled trial, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial conducted from the 22nd of March through the 20th of May. And essentially what they did was had a screening form that people filled out to kind of assess for eligibility. And if they were symptomatic or known to test positive, then they kind of fell in one group. And if they were asymptomatic, then they fell in the other group. They also did the other study that you're talking about, essentially potential exposure plus asymptomatic. They basically have a separate study that they've published with that information. The patients who were essentially eligible for this were patients who either had a positive test or had a known high-risk exposure and had symptoms, or a patient who had a close contact with a known COVID positive person. And the reason that they don't have all COVID positive tests is because there were just a limited number of tests available during that time period. But they really did a pretty good job of sort of narrowing down, like, these are probable COVID people. If you had an exposure and you have the symptoms, we might not be able to test you, but you probably have the COVID. So of all the people they screened, they ended up with a total of 491 patients that they randomly assigned to either get hydroxychloroquine, which was given 800 milligrams once, and then 600 milligrams 6 to 8 hours after that, and 600 milligrams daily for 4 more days, or they got a placebo. And let me get to my results page here because I don't have slides. But essentially, there was no difference in anything. The endpoints that they looked at were symptom severity over, like, a change over 14 days, any adverse effects, hospitalizations and deaths, and essentially the only thing that had any statistical difference was adverse effects, and more people in the hydroxychloroquine group had side effects. The one thing they did say, Jeff, you're talking about oseltamivir earlier. So they did note that the patients in the hydroxychloroquine group had a 12% relative improvement over the placebo. But they say in the article, for comparison, oseltamivir in influenza showed a 25 to 35% relative reduction in symptom severity score in the clinical trials. So even that 12% is really not all that significant. And it certainly didn't meet statistical significance. So there was no difference in symptoms. There was no difference in the length of illness. There was no difference in hospitalization or death. The only thing that happened was if you took the hydroxychloroquine, you had more side effects. And that was really the meat of the study.
So, and just to be clear, can you tell us the name? You said it was Annals of Emergency Medicine. What was the name of the paper and the first author?
Sure, it's Annals of Internal Medicine.
Internal, sorry.
Yeah, the first author is Caleb Skipper, and the paper name is Hydroxychloroquine in Non-Hospitalized Adults with Early COVID-19.
There you go. Thank you. Mike, can you drop that in?
It's gonna take me a couple minutes to do it, but I can.
So I will tell you what one of the things I like to do. I'm a visual sort of guy, so when I look at a paper, I like to look at who I like to ask myself the PICO question: what was the population studied? What was the intervention, the control, and the outcome? And then I want to see the data. I don't want just tables. I want some pretty pictures. And I love me some forest plots. And there is a really nice forest plot, figure 5. That is it. Yes, very good. Thank you. And so what you're seeing is a dot and a line through it. I call it a TIE fighter diagram. And if that line crosses the great big vertical line, then there is no statistical difference. And what we're looking at here is all of the TIE fighters for a variety of different stratifications all show no significant difference. That is a pretty negative trial right there.
So this is a tough bar to meet, though, right? So what do we know? You know, some of the people who want to downplay this disease process say that 99% of the people that get better, right? 99%, the mortality of this disease is probably less than 1% if you count everybody that gets the infection.
Well, it's way low if you count the entire uninfected population in your denominator.
But So for instance, you'll see people come on and say, well, my doctor,
There you go.
there you go.
There's that forest plot.
Yep.
Thank you, Mikey.
Yep.
You'll have people come on and say, well, I prescribed this 50 times or 100 times and everybody survived, or 2 times,
Right.
as one person said, right? And so when you're talking again, you're talking about a disease that the mortality the mortality is roughly 3 or 4% of everybody we know that are able to test that has it. The probably real mortality is probably around somewhere between 0.4 and 1%. And so I think it would be really hard you would need a whole lot of patients to show a difference in survival when mortality is this low.
And I think that's a good point. When you look at this forest plot, you do notice what looks like a trend. So you see the dots all on one side. It's just that the confidence intervals exceed past 0. So maybe, hypothetically, if you had a crap ton of patients, you might be able to tease out a significant difference.
Right. But you also want to think about how close those dots are to that line. And so, the effect size here is pretty small. Those dots are getting close to 1.
Yeah, with enough patients, if you have an odds ratio of 0.995, it can be significant. That doesn't mean it's clinically significant.
Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you what, Remley, do you want to do a quick summary of your paper also?
Oh, I'll give you the real quick summary. Absolutely. It's real similar to the one that Aaron just presented. This one is called Hydroxychloroquine in Patients with Mainly Mild to Moderate Coronavirus Disease 2019, open label, randomized control trial. This is in BMJ, and it was conducted in China in early February, actually. They had 150 patients. They randomized to 2 arms. And I'll not even look at the numbers. I'm just going to tell you, no difference for hydroxychloroquine in terms of resolving coronavirus disease. There was a difference in terms of adverse side effects, with hydroxychloroquine having more of those. And it's really
talk about what kind of side effects they had. I'm just curious. Because the paper I'm going to talk about, similar thing, but I'm curious what those folks experienced.
Sure. So these are the milder side effects. This is the known diarrhea. One of the things that is interesting is the intervention. It's a high dose of hydroxychloroquine. They did a loading dose of 1,200 mg, and then they did a maintenance dose of 800. And, there's some studies where we give hydroxychloroquine for things like lupus, but it's a much lower dose. And so those higher doses do tend to have more side effects.
Okay. All right.
We have the one visualization I like from that paper, Emily, is there is a pseudo Kaplan-Meier-ish type thing. And boy, does it show some pretty similar lines.
Yep, they're pretty darn close. I've got my visual here electronically, but can't share. But,
yeah, no, sharing, that seems to be turned off. Yep.
I'll drop the name. I'll put the name of the paper in the chat.
After spending the entire day recording on Zoom for EMS Expo, I can tell you sharing off, probably a good thing. Well, Mikey, do you want to give us yours?
Yeah, let's just jump into it. Let me pull up because I actually had a couple slides here.
Yay.
But I want to make sure that this works correctly. So just give me 2 seconds here, and then I need to drag this thing back over. There's like a lot of.
While you're doing that, I must heap a little bit of scorn on the paper Remley just talked about. And my criticism of it is very similar to the criticism I have with Tamiflu. And what we're talking about is a disease-oriented outcome that doesn't matter to patients. So we're looking at how long it takes to clear viral particles.
Another thing about the paper is they didn't initiate treatment until very late. So I think the mean time to randomization was something like 16 days after symptom onset.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yep. I think in general, I'm stalling for you, Mikey. You good?
No, I'm good, brother.
All right, man.
Up already.
What you got?
You're such a good staller. You're such a good staller. That's really good. So if you look back at all the papers that we've talked about before, we looked at like super sick people, sort of not so sick, and kind of everything in between there. Well, the paper that you're seeing on the screen right here was just published the other day. I think it was on the 6th of August. It was a randomized trial of hydroxychloroquine on post-exposure prophylaxis for COVID-19. So what they did was this was actually kind of interesting. I don't know. Remley, I'm super interested to find out from your perspective. I don't know if you had a chance to look at this one or not, but pretty interesting stuff. Basically, United States, Canada, they started looking at folks that had an exposure, essentially a high-risk exposure to somebody with COVID-19. So what they wanted to do was find out, well, and this actually brought back some thoughts of the exposure that I had. Like I could have been in the study. So what they were looking for is someone that had a high-risk exposure, so more than 10 minutes without a mask, without PPE, to somebody that was COVID positive. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to look at and find would giving people in that situation hydroxychloroquine actually keep them from getting sick, essentially. And so that's what they looked at. And they looked at 821 asymptomatic participants, and it was cool. They basically just went out and said on social media or in the newspaper or whatever, and said, hey, would you like to be in the study? And that's kind of how they found people, which is pretty unique. But they essentially found 821 patients, 87.6% of the participants, so 719 out of the 821 reported a high risk exposure to a confirmed COVID-19 contact. I'm doing my cheat sheet here, and I've got some more pictures that we'll show you here in a second. I guess the bottom line was it didn't work, right? It didn't work. So let me show you some of the nitty gritty here as it comes down to it. So let me hit some buttons here, and I got to do some things, and it takes a second. It's like a whole thing. So basically what we're going to look at first here is table 1. And we're going to try to get these in the show notes, right, Dr. Jarvis?
Absolutely.
All right. So table 1 is basically demographic and clinical characteristics of the participants that were in this particular study. So I had their age, median weight, what their exposure was, the time from the exposure to the enrollment. They tried to keep it they tried to give some latency to the disease process. So they would sort of settle in there for 4 or 5 days and then kind of get them on there. So there was actually a lot to look at here. But let me get to these next couple pictures. These were pretty good. And it's just a little bit slow. And I usually have them queued up so I don't have to wait this long. But there's a forest plot coming. There's a forest plot coming.
I like it.
Bye for that. All right. So table 2. This was the outcomes of the hydroxychloroquine therapy for post-exposure prophylaxis against COVID-19. And this is this is basically it right here. It's telling you everything you need to know. So confirmed or probable COVID-19. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but they did a really good job of the randomization on this. So of the 821 patients, 414 went into the hydroxychloroquine and 407 went to the placebo. And again, it was all the pharmacy took care of all this. So they sent those patients either the HCQ or they sent them the placebo, and they were the only ones to know what was going on. So this was a true randomized controlled placebo study. Like this is what Fauci loves. He was saying, show me one of these that works, and he'll buy into it. But we did one and it didn't really seem to do anything here. So there is that one here. Let's get to this next one here. And I will pop it up here. It just takes a sec. Sorry about that. It's all very complicated on my end back here on the back end. But what we're looking at here is this is figure number 2. And so what we're looking at is the percent. This is the whole paper right here, in case you want to know. We've got hydroxychloroquine, which is the lighter sort of greenish gray color on the left of the 3 sets of 2 forest plots that we see here. The left-hand side one is hydroxychloroquine. The one on the right is placebo. We've got trial day across the bottom, so that's 0 to 14 days. And then we've got the percent of new COVID cases of those patients that were exposed to somebody with COVID. And as you can see, it didn't make any difference. So those lines are right next to each other. The same amount of people that got placebo that got hydroxychloroquine had the same sort of occurrence of COVID-19 infection as the people that had placebo. So really, at the end of the day, that's the whole study right there. And it was cool. I enjoyed reading this one. I might have another one. I might have another picture. Let me look. Yeah, there's one more. Stand by.
So while you're doing that, I will say, I mean, one potential criticism is, yeah, you guys just don't like hydroxychloroquine, so you're picking and choosing the randomized control trials. No, these are pretty much it. As of the time we did the PubMed, as of the time we did the PubMed search, this was it. There were no more RCTs.
Yeah,
this was the RCT that we found.
And that ASHP page has everything, and there are no positive RCTs of hydroxychloroquine.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Lincoln and I have a method that we're going to use right now to definitively decide whether or not hydroxychloroquine's the answer. It's very scientific.
Very.
do it.
There we go.
Oh, the 8-ball. Okay.
You know why
here
we're
it
going to
is.
do this? Because we don't like the answer we've gotten so far, so we will consult magic.
My sources say no.
Well, there it is. It's complete.
Science.
Science.
Well, just to be complete, let's wrap up with about 45 seconds to a minute on the last one. This is out of Catalonia, Spain. It's a multi-center, open-label, randomized control trial, meaning it's not placebo-controlled. These are non-hospitalized patients with COVID and under 5 days of symptoms. So they got to them early. They also had mild symptoms. They were excluded if they have moderate symptoms, which they defined as anything that needed hospitalization. The intervention was hydroxychloroquine, and that was compared to no hydroxychloroquine. Their primary outcome, which I frown upon, I cast scorn upon thee, you primary outcome, reduction in viral load. And then the second outcome was time to complete resolution. So we do have a couple of pretty pictures here, but basically it is about as negative as you can get when that pops up. So there was no difference in either reduction in viral load or time to complete resolution. And that pretty well sums up all of the RCTs that we've been able to get our hands on hydroxychloroquine. So
That's it.
I think that's it.
I think we had a few people stick with us.
I think I do. And I think we had some people, understandably so. Fauci dropped the mic and the show went dead.
That was it.
He said what he had to say.
Yeah, he did. I think we were upwards of 100 people on here at one point at the height, and we made it with 10. So if you're one of the 10, Brian Liebig, I know you're one of them. Who else? Maybe Jeremy Baker, Spencer Oliver. I don't know. Yeah, I'm on there. I'm actually on there too. So maybe there's really only 4 people and then us.
Looks like Sturdivant just popped in. I raise a glass to thee who stuck with us, even though it's
Thank you guys.
empty.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Any final thoughts here, guys?
Well, I'll just say, thanks to everyone for jumping on, taking some time. I know Ritu, you were sort of jammed up against the clock. Thanks for jumping on and taking some time with us tonight. It's always good to have you on, my brother. Thank you so much.
And I would like to thank our special guest. Ritu, you're just sort of a guest. You know, you're on. We're part of the family. But we have 2 very special guests. So thank you, Dr. Crow and Dr. Lincoln. We really appreciate your insight. Aaron, as usual, you did a great job on the oral case. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you for letting us hang with the cool kids.
You guys are cool.
You guys are
You're
the
cool ones.
We're the nerds.
Yeah.
Y'all make nerds look cool.
That's right.
That's right.
All right, good. Well,
I am
let me
so
just
pleased with myself. I was recording a video earlier today, and I was talking about a study on mask use in golden Syrian hamsters, and counts.
Wow.
sent me an email, a text, and said, "Oh my God, that's like next level nerddom." So when Dr. Counts tells me I'm next level nerd, I have arrived.
That is a serious nerdum.
Yeah, you've arrived somewhere. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right,
Well,
I'm going
Mikey, why don't you take us out of here, buddy?
I'm going to get us out of here on behalf of Dr. Crow, Dr. Lincoln, Dr. Jarvis, and Dr. Sani. Mike Verkest, you've been watching two-parter, apparently, of the EMS Lighthouse Project podcast, live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and anywhere else you can imagine. And we'll try to string this damn thing together and see if we can make a pod out of it. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, we appreciate you guys hanging in there. We will see you soon on the next live, whatever it may be. Maybe it'll be a second shift. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, you guys have a great night. Stay safe out there, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good night, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye, all.
Good night.